let our speaker adjust his lighting. While we're getting set up, I'll give a little bit of an introduction for tonight. So the talk tonight is through the Catherine Kerr Vital Energy in Health and Healing Collaborative lecture series, lecture and workshop series. And this is actually a pretty special time of year. This is the 4th year now that we've had this lecture series going, starting in 2020. We began giving these talks online in memory of Dr. Catherine Kerr, who is a really exceptional researcher who worked here at Brown University and founded a whole new embodied neuroscience lab that did a lot of work on Qigong and Taiji Chuan and Chinese medicine and their influence on human health and well-being. So including the final research project she worked on actually was just recently published last year, parts of it having to do with the effects of Qigong on cancer survivors and improving their symptoms of fatigue. So unfortunately, Dr. Kerr passed away in 2016, but her work continues on. This lecture series is one of the ways in which we try to continue in memory of her, the vision that she brought to us that we can bring together all these different ways of studying different facets of Chinese medicine and Qigong, martial arts, and Taoism, and the possibility that they have for helping people in the world today, whether through historical study, through scientific study, or through the work of practitioners who are in the field who are directly working with these methods today. So today, it's my great joy on this 4th anniversary of the series to welcome Dr. Greg Casey to give a talk with us. Greg is a licensed acupuncturist, doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And he's also quite prolific teacher of Qigong, meditation, and internal Chinese martial arts like Taiji Chuan and others. Greg is also an ordained Taoist priest. So he's an 89th generation of the Yuqing Huanglao Pai, which is the Jade Purity Yellow Emperor Laozi sect, which is a suborder within the Shangqing Pai, the highest purity lineage. So for people that know Taoist history, that's a pretty famous from the Tang Dynasty. So 89th generation of that, and is also a member of the Longmen Pai, Dragon's Gate lineage, which is part of the Quanzhen Pai, which is the largest order, monastic order in China these days. So he's a 27th generation member of that. And he is ordained through really one of the most exceptional Taoist priests and teachers of Chinese medicine in the United States, Jeffrey Yuan, who has a school in Ashford, North Carolina, where Greg has not only studied, but also has been a teacher for many years now. And so we're very lucky to have Greg come up here and give a talk with us. We're fortunate that he just happened to be coming back to this area and joining our talks. And also another reason why I feel it's very, very significant to welcome Greg here is that he was the last Qigong teacher and acupuncturist to work with Dr. Kerr in her life. And so in the last few months of her life, he was working directly with her, not only in helping with her research as a Qigong teacher, but also directly as a doctor of hers. And so it's very significant we can welcome Dr. Casey to join us tonight and give us this lecture. So please, Dr. Casey, let's give a welcome for Dr. Casey.
Thank you, Larson. Thank you very much. Very kind introduction, and on paper sounds like a lot to live up to, but I don't think I'm nearly as impressive as all of that sounds. Thank you so much for having me come and share as part of this series. Here I've got on the screen, of course, the topic for tonight's series and just what Larson just mentioned about me. But I wanted to start first with some acknowledgements myself. Of course, first to Larson for reaching out to me and inviting me to be part of this series. And Anne, who's a program manager who forwarded me to Larson. I only became aware of this series earlier this year when there was a course running, a talk running, and Anne forwarded that information to my alma mater, Taoist Traditions College of Chinese Medical Arts in Asheville, North Carolina. And they sent that out to all the alumni. And I saw that, and it was very poignant to me because it, of course, was titled as the Catherine Kerr Vital Energy in Health and Healing Research Collaborative, and talks taking place in her memory and with her as an inspiration for the initiative. And so when I saw that, and being back in Rhode Island now for just about a year and a half or so, um, I've been thinking more of Kathy since the time that I knew her when I lived here previously in 2015 and 2016. I mean, we knew her really 2016, just before her passing, really. And so I'm very grateful to Anne for just having shared this with the college, Dallas Traditions, them for having forwarded it, and for me having to be able to uh, reconnect in this way with Brown, initiatives there to integrate contemplative studies and neuroscience and research and all of that. Where I first, well, I'll get more to that later, but everyone else also at the Kerr Vital Energy Research Collaborative, all the members there, just want to express gratitude for everything you do and have done to bring this program to light and life. And as I mentioned on the flyer, all the different factors and groups that have gone into supporting these talks and these initiatives. And so then also wanting to express thanks to my Sifu, Jeffrey Yuan, who Larson just mentioned, and of course, Kathy herself, because how I initially met Kathy was back in 2016. She might have emailed me in 2015, but I think we really met in 2016, which was just after I'd moved back to Rhode Island, about a year after I graduated from acupuncture school. And it's my home state. And Kathy, at that time, she, in her own life, utilized a lot of Qigong to work with her own health and healing and wellness. And in that process, she, in some way, became aware of Jeffrey Yuan and his, some of his teachings. I think she saw a video of him teaching Qigong or a talk he gave or something, and something he had said about practice. The practice resonated with her and kind of confirmed, as I recall, something she had experienced in her own practice of Qigong. So that really, caught her attention, and she wanted to get in touch with Jeffrey and see if she could have him come up to Brown to collaborate, work with the neuroscience department, etc. And Jeffrey declined. He told her that he was busy or whatever, and he's often like that. But he said that he had me as a student at that time. I just moved to Rhode Island, and that I might be interested in doing some work with Kathy and everyone there at Brown. And so that's when Kathy reached out to me, and I initially, at some time in the summer, early summer term of 2016, went to Brown and gave some short talk and practice with Kathy and some students there. And we were going to continue some of that. But then the next time I heard from her, very soon after, her condition had taken a turn. And she had asked me if then, rather than working collaboratively on these programs, if I would work with her more personally, doing, teaching her some Qigong and going and practicing with her at her house and such. And I did that with her right up until the time of her passing, as Larson mentioned, 8 years ago now. And then shortly after that, that was in November 2016. Then in January, I moved back to Asheville, North Carolina, and I lived there for over 5 years. And during that time, taught at Dallas Traditions College, was a clinic supervisor, and more there. So just wanted to give those acknowledgments, all these people, all these forces that have come together to help, to allow this series and tonight's talk to take place, and especially to Kathy and her interests in these topics, her initiatives, and the lasting effect that all of her work and all of her life's work and cultivation has continued to lead to, and the ripple effects that we leave behind with our actions, the decisions we make that allow us to carry forward on the paths that we go down in life, and how those carry forward into the future. So I'm just really grateful for everything she's done and did. to allow this all to take place. So beyond that, I wanted to begin with how I chose this topic, which Larson was very gracious in, just saying you could really do any topic, anything related to Chinese medicine or martial arts or Taoism, or I could teach, some lengthy Qigong practice or whatever I wanted to do. For me, I went on the website and I looked at like what the little mission blurbs were, and I copy and pasted those here because I read them. I don't know that everyone here will have read them if you're on YouTube or whatever. So I think that's worthwhile to begin with, how I narrowed in on this topic tonight of looking at Qigong practice variables for self-cultivation, and also if you're doing scientific research of Qigong. So on the website, dissect this together. The Catherine Kerr Vital Energy in Health and Healing lecture and workshop series was originally conceptualized by the late Catherine Kerr, PhD, to catalyze a new field of integrated discovery around the role of vital energy, qi, in health and healing. So this sounds like, to me, when I read this, like I feel like I'm in the right place because this is all about what I'm interested in. The merging of fields, interdisciplinary studies I love, and catalyzing new fields of integrated discovery and around this idea of qi, especially, is what I'm all about. So I'm in the right place with this, building off of recent advances in the sciences, as well as the long-standing scholarship in humanities, examining how contemplative practices, e.g. meditation and Qigong, may promote health. This speaker series will bring together humanistic, scientific, clinical, and practitioner perspectives. And reading that, I feel like I'm mainly bringing the practitioner perspective, where I initially got into all of this from a practitioner perspective, my interest growing up in martial arts and spiritual type of practices, meditation. That led me, by the time I was 18, I started studying Tai Chi and Qigong, specifically like at a school. That was the same semester I moved away for college. I also started my, uh, at a school doing Qigong Tai Chi, not just reading books or videos anymore, because I already looked at those a little beforehand, and did some martial arts before that as well. But that's what brought me to becoming a practitioner of Chinese medicine, and also then eventually a Taoist priest, was starting as a practitioner of Qigong, Tai Chi, martial arts, and then wanting to try to understand from a more traditional perspective, what are all these exercises? What's more of the intent behind them? And how can we decode them more than we sometimes get information about them from the very well-meaning teachers we learn them from? You don't always, especially as Westerners, we're often information hungry, and there might not be, depending on your teacher, a lot of vocal or written information about what you're practicing. But myself, I always look to, the context clues of life. And I saw going to Chinese medicine school as a way to further build context around Qigong practice. And so then that also brings me into a clinical perspective, because I do also practice acupuncture clinically. I teach people Qigong exercises clinically, or if you see me for private acupuncture treatments, I almost always finish with teaching a person a short or more elaborate, if they're up for it, Qigong exercise that can support them in whatever they're working through. So that's some of what I feel I could bring to this, at least. Then, in honoring Kathy's work and vision, the speaker series will provide an important forum to continue and deepen a critical interdisciplinary approach to studying the role of vital energy in health. So when I hear that, it makes me think of it's really asking the question, what is the role of vital energy in health and healing? If we're bringing people together and doing interdisciplinary approaches and research, is trying to bring some understanding to this question. And we'll accomplish this through the exploration of current future scholarship, research pathways, and collaborations like we're doing right now. So that's, a lot of what I considered in choosing this topic. Also thought, of course, about who it's for. So the contemplative studies and other students there at Brown, potential interdisciplinary researchers interested in doing Qigong research. And then if, I think this is getting posted to YouTube, so just the general public of people who might click on this. And then of course, all of those people could also be self-cultivators, people who are working on themselves and may be interested in using Qigong as part of that. So before we go any further, I wanted to just do some practice to ground into and kind of give us all a common experience of doing some self-cultivation and one possibility of what that could look like. So to do that, we'll have us all just do a seated practice, be simple. So if you're sitting in a chair, have you scoot forward to the edge of your chair, sitting on the edge of your seat, just your tailbone, sits bones on the chair. You have some space behind your knees, right? So you're not cramped up like that. If you're sitting on the floor or couch or something, you could sit cross-legged. I often put a prop below your tailbone to lift up off the chair, so just your tailbone. And then if you can do like a lotus pose, like just your knees pressing down, be more advanced, but cross-legged is good too. It's fine. And then we'll just start here with our palms in our laps. So I'm just gonna fold one palm on the other and then just make a circle with my thumbs. And just resting them gently on my lap. Feel some space in my armpits. It could fit about like an egg or your fist balled up into your armpit. All right, so those are some of the physical alignments to do. And then also internal alignments common with Qigong. It'd be like touching the tip of the tongue to the upper palate. And you can lightly touch the teeth so they're not clenching but not slack jaw. You can slightly tuck your chin so you feel the back of the neck opens a little bit. And they often say to imagine like a string at the top of the head, gently lifting through the crown, making your head and shoulders feel somewhat light. So that's our physical posturing. And next, we're just going to bring more awareness into our bodies. You can mostly close your eyes, just letting a little slip of light in. Many people look toward the tip of the nose or the middle of the eyes as a way to focus inwardly. But otherwise, just focusing inwardly, starting to notice now where your breathing is in your body. You feel more breathing in your chest right now. Maybe you feel somewhat congested in your sinuses now. And maybe you're already doing deep belly breathing, which is where I'll guide you to focus your breath now into the belly more. So as you inhale, just letting the belly expand gently. Exhale, relax gently. Focusing your mind and your breath into that area, the lower abdomen. You do this a few times. Now, if you do this type of thing often, you might already feel some heat building up in your belly. If not, you might not. But wherever you're at with that, your next inhale, let your arms become a little bit light. Let them start to float up off your legs. And let's just float to hover one hand above the other, whichever one you want. And now focusing between your palms. As you inhale, expand into your belly. And as you exhale, imagine sending some of that energy from the belly out through your arms to this area like a ball between your palms. Inhale in the belly. Exhale, extending, pushing the chi like pressure, like through a hose, out through the palms into the region of this ball. Inhale in the belly, exhale, pressurizing to fill this ball. And maybe now feeling some greater warmth in the palms or tingling, common experience. And from there, wherever you're feeling, now I'll just guide you to think about any aspect of your body, your system, that you feel could use some healing energy, something you're aware of, you would like to catalyze its healing further. And so for me, I'm just going to bring them in towards my chest, my hands now, thinking of my hands as holding this field of energy around them. And I'm just going to apply and breathe to my chest. So wherever you feel, maybe your knee, maybe your kidney, maybe your head. And maybe you can feel the warmth of your palms as you're hovering or lightly touching. And that's chi too. Heat is chi. Like you're emitting a warm, glowing light from your palms to that region. A few more breaths doing that. Actively willing your body to heal something. And then just let the palms come back to the lap. And we'll cover here one over the other, covering the palms below the navel, feeling the warmth there. And with your next inhale, we'll circle the hands up one way, exhale, circle down around the navel 3 times each direction, circling the hands with the breath, feeling the warmth, helping to harmonize and settle everything back here. And the warmth. And just relax, coming back. Okay, so just a short, simple practice. Those of you who've been, are familiar with Qigong, you've probably done something like that, thousands of times before, with some likely variations. So just wanted to do that as a reference practice that I might reference as we go through further and give us just some moment to be grounded into our bodies here as we go through this otherwise somewhat heady talk. So the next part is going to be breaking down the topic and the summary or abstract that I wrote. Some of you might have read that along with, that went out on the flyer and all of that. So I extracted from that the essential points there that I claimed we were going to cover: the why, what, how, where, and when to practice or research Qigong. And then also overview a number of internal and external variables that can be considered. And this idea of internal and external variables is really something that I kind of came up with doing this as a way to organize some of these ideas. And the why, what, how, where, when, they can kind of be organized into these internal, external variables. We'll do that later on. Oops. But I said, that these are things that could potentially be tested for by scientists studying Qigong, and perhaps more crucially, and I thought about that later, and thought maybe I should have said more immediately rather than crucially, but maybe ultimately crucially is still right, because perhaps more crucially, these are things that could be tested for by the individuals engaging in Qigong practice for their own self-healing martial development and or spiritual cultivation, whatever reason. And the reason I went with the word crucially is because even if scientists are able to identify, you do this qigong practice for this ailment or whatever, we've sorted through all these controls of variables, and this is what the practice should look like. This is how you do it. This is where you do it. This is when you do it. And these are the type of results we think you'll get. You still have to test that, right? It's just like any medication goes through all the trials and everything, but you still have to give it to the individual and see if it works for them. So that's why, even if some of this is useful to people studying Qigong, and it brings advances in Qigong studies and research to make the prescription of Qigong more effective, it still has to be tested by the individual. So you, at the end of the day, crucially, could still utilize some of this. And that's part of this idea of self-cultivation. The Chinese term I'm familiar with is Xu Lian, where Xu implies the idea of studying, repairing, cultivating, and Lian, the idea of smelting, refining, distilling, condensing. So it's this process people go through. It's the idea of self-cultivation within Taoism, doing work such as Qigong, but lots of other things can be part of your self-cultivation as well. Music you play, or the calligraphy you do, or any number of facets of life. The acupuncture you do, whatever you do, could be part of your self-cultivation. But Qigong is a very obvious one, at least to me, that you're working on yourself, you're refining yourself. Like a metallurgist, you're working out the slag that's weighing you down, and you are refining yourself to become like five element theory, like metal is the ending, is the gold element, the state of perfection, highly sought after within Taoism to become perfected, completed, genuine, authentic. Gen is usually the term, but like the word, what is it, chuan, right? It means also complete. And that's basically the word for metal without the little dashes in there, that you're not working anymore. But this idea of Shubi and self-cultivation, that you have to be, from my perspective, and like how my Sifu Jeffrey teaches it, being a mystic. To us, the idea that you have to discover what works for you, that you could have teachers that maybe what they did works for you, because like he says, probably they're a lot like you. You put a lot of faith and stock in them. And so what worked for them maybe will work for you. But even still, you still have to do the work yourself and see if it checks out. And so comparing, if you're looking at the idea of science and Qigong, it's not just science and Qigong, but all these other things, because Qigong traditionally already has interdisciplinary relationships with these other factors. So as much as we might think of needing to bring it into interdisciplinary from a Western or academic perspective, different type of scientists, etc., you also have the interdisciplinary side from the Chinese perspective. And when we're looking at science and Qigong, it's also then bringing in the sciences or arts, we could argue over, of acupuncture, herbal medicine, food energetics, feng shui, astrology. All of these could be seen as parts of Chinese naturalism, which then mostly got subsumed within Taoism. And so if we're looking at, the scientific method or trying to study Chinese things with science, it's being laggy, there it is, that we have all these factors to consider, and that to me, that it's really like two languages, science and the Chinese paradigm that way, that are both trying to describe just the way that things are. It's like the human condition, I think, to some extent. We see things and we interact with them and come up with some sort of explanation for them. We naturally are, inquisitive. We come up with questions and hypotheses, I think, naturally. You see that right now. I have a 2.5-year-old son, and you see that all the time, him just testing the physics and laws of nature. What happens if I jump harder into the puddle? What happens like that? And so we're constantly questioning and testing already through these two languages for us right now. And you have people who can speak these languages more or less fluently. I'm barely able to in some regards, but then like people like my Sifu Jeffrey, who could talk to you all day about the potential relationships of the actual elements on the periodical table and how they would relate energetically to all the different energetics of yin yang, five elements, all the different Chinese medicine, functions of the organs and channel systems and how those could all relate. And through uh, through mineral science is a major way he does that, bringing in looking at chemical constituents and making parallels to Eastern thought, also through like essential oils. And there are people who are very literate in both these languages. And they're like people who can make bridges between East and West and comparing ideas. And that's something I engaged in a lot in my undergraduate years because I already was getting interested in these things, and I was taking a lot of science classes and philosophy classes and comparative religion classes, and practicing Tai Chi and Qigong and learning about these things. So I, from fairly early on, was always trying to synthesize and try to get a lot of ideas to play nice together, if you will. But ultimately, from a Taoist perspective, they think that whatever language you're working in, that's not really going to be sufficient to convey whatever it is you're looking at, right? Like chapter 1 of the Tao Te Ching, whatever it is that you try to put into words, the words never really fully can suffice to, be what that thing is, to convey the full experience of that thing. So that's the Taoist catch at the end of it, is that yes, you can go through all of these processes and come up with all of these ways of trying to understand and to explain things and learn from other people in these regards too. But at the end of the day, it's still something that has to be your own experience. And when you have that experience, whatever it is, how much can you put it into words anyway? But despite that, we have these systems that are trying to explain things, and you have the general flow of the scientific method coming up with a question. Sometimes the hypothesis is right there with the question. Sometimes it takes a little while for the hypothesis or hypotheses to come up. But at whatever juncture you have a hypothesis, you do the planning that you're going to carry out an experiment to test the hypothesis. You might need to do some research and looking at data as part of that planning, gathering the materials you'll need to carry out the research. And then you're going to have the experiment take place. Maybe you want to see, the experiment could be whatever, but something exciting. How much TNT does it take to, blow something up? Just obviously, the experiment is the exciting part, I think, typically. But maybe it's for you, it's the data analysis or, the conclusion, picking up the pieces, sorting through the dust, and what did all that TNT do, or whatever did what we do, and then come up with some conclusion about it. And then that usually will generate more hypotheses or questions, and then the cycle goes around again, often through the scientific method. And that way, I think science has probably created more questions than they have answers. I mean, not to downplay how much science has brought to our life, the conveniences of technology and everything. But in terms of answering ultimate questions, are we really necessarily closer to that? And even if so, does it bring more happiness to our lives even, or more of a sense of completion? And some of you who know the five element theory probably already see what I was doing with this, because the science, is comparing science and Chinese traditional thought, it occurred to me that the scientific method is also like an outline of the 5 elemental phases, where water represents the mysteries of life, and then wood represents that we see someplace we want to go or something that we think we can test or become, and might need to do some a lot of planning, gathering things, reflecting back through the past in that process. And then fire is going to be the experiment, bringing that thing you want to test out and trying it out. And then earth is going to be the data analysis, like the spleen and stomach is the digestion of what's taken place, what's there. And then metal is the conclusion, like lungs and large intestine is what you finally, say about it, or, what you produce, what you leave behind about it. Large intestine, hopefully, is not, too much crap that you produce. But even if it is, that's going to be useful as fertilizer to something else as well. So this, it just occurred to me that the scientific method and 5 element phases also have a sort of harmony here and a correlation that to me just highlights the universality of humans questioning and interacting with their environments and themselves to try to answer those questions, and the search for truths, and science and philosophy and spiritual studies and religious studies, that these are places that you see both of these terms come up, was always intriguing to me, studying the origins of things and the functioning of things. These are prevalent in astronomy, physics, and then also in those other, philosophy, spirituality, religion, metaphysics, etc. So whatever angle you're looking at it from, like typically I think of science as searching somewhat more externally, using a lot of external instrumentation, trying to measure things about the world around us, or maybe within us in terms of medical devices and such that can measure things within us, but trying to get an objective measurement taking place through scientific processes in general, compared to internal type of searching and internal instrumentation, you might say, of what happens when we turn our focus inwardly and we focus our powers of concentration and our sense organs, etc., inside ourselves to experience ourselves as the living and breathing component of the universe that we are. The idea that, yes, you can search for everything externally, these cosmological principles or principles of the fabric of existence or reality, but that's also within you. And the idea of where else do you expect to find the truth if not right off the tip of your nose, right? It's kind of the internal exploration paradigm that to me has tended to lack a lot, I think, for most people from the typical Western paradigms. We have some traditions, of course, coming up that guide people internally, but that's a forefront of the qigong, typical qigong practices and Chinese type of paradigms. And so, whatever you're doing, how much are you kind of recording the process? From a Taoist kind of existential point of view, that's happening, right? Especially the wood element, the hun. I think that's recording the process. Everything you're doing gets recorded, is becoming part of your sort of Akashic record, or what I heard recently, some people call the inner palace of the record of your life, your book of life, your book of death. It all gets recorded astrally that way, I think. But you could also be doing more like on this plane, journaling, which I've had Jeffrey and other Taoists suggest, and I've read in books and stuff about journaling. If you were literate Taoist, that is, it's not always illiterate. But you could journal and try to keep a record of what you're doing, when you're doing, how you're doing it, what you're, all of that, and what you felt during those experiences as a way to keep track of your progress in a way. Or if it's, of course, from, you're recording this, it's lagging now. Right, recording the process could also be, if you're researching this scientifically, and how you're writing up your lab report, basically. So continuing to break down the topic, just kind of all getting on the same page of just what is Qigong, first from a kind of definition point of view, or Qi, typical definitions when you look it up of air, gas, steam, vapor, breath, energy, life force, a force that can do work, like in physics, would account for all different types of force in terms of thermal energy, electrochemical energy, mechanical energy, and how those can all transfer between each other, right? Mechanical can create thermal, then you could cook something on the thermal, and that could create some other kind of, chemical or something. But for us, especially, getting into these kind of more subtle aspects as we go down the list here, and thinking about it, especially as like a life force, like in the title of the series, the vital energy in health and healing, that's like a life force energy. And in Chinese medicine, that kind of checks out that idea of qi as being really a life force, even compared to like the idea of shen or spirit, where I've heard the idea that they think like you can be alive without shen, which is the idea like you could be in a coma, your body's still alive, you still have the jing of your body and the qi of your respiration and your physiology still functioning, but there's no one, the lights aren't on, right? There's no one to talk to, the shen is out. But that if you don't have qi, then you can't have life, that your ability to continue to have the qi dynamic, they'll call it the qi ji, the moving up, moving in, moving out, all of that is not possible anymore, and respiration ceases and heartbeat stops, and without qi you can't have life, but even without shen you can have life. It's an interesting idea. And so it is this kind of animating force, this physical force as well, that can transfer between all the different types of physical force. And then it's also, perhaps most subtly, just the idea of a relationship, the idea of whatever you're connecting to, whatever you're relating to, that's right, you have a different energy from something than someone else does. You relate to it differently. Maybe it's a food, right? And maybe that one person is allergic to a food, right? So that obviously is not the type of food that they get positive qi from or something like that. But someone else, they're going to have a positive association with that, and that's going to be a positive source of energy for them. So that's just one, simple example of how energy is the energy that exists between two things, whether it's the potential between two electrons, positive and negative polarities. It's the potential of what would happen of if I just touch this cup, or if I hit it with a sledgehammer. It's, the relationship changes depending on, or the energy changes depending on the relationship and the interaction. So in that way, you get different energy from things than different people. It's relative, it's relational, is an idea I work with, the idea of qi. And I know also my Sifu Jeffrey will sometimes try to define qi as this, as an energy of relationship, how the quality between things changes relative to those things, the energy changes. And then gong is the idea of work, effort, cultivation, merit, achievement, skill. It's like something that you put the work and the effort into, and it becomes like a cultivation, and then you develop achievements, and it becomes a skill, something you do over and over, and it becomes something that is easily reproducible by you, hopefully, like people with qigong and amazing abilities we hear about with qigong, with healing, or they can change thermal properties and things or whatever. But how consistent can they be in that? How much of the skill do they produce in it? But something that takes time and effort is part of that. So next, want to look at variables of why to practice Qigong, because then that's going to heavily further influence the what, how, when, and where you'd be practicing. So traditionally, I often talk about how major reasons people would practice Qigong be for martial arts purposes, increase stamina or speed or endurance or resilience or strength or sensitivity, or some of those maybe some might think more woo-woo ones, if you could really control subtly other people's energy or influence, kind of their subtle body with very little to no physical effort and things like that. I was thinking recently also probably some opera people were into qigong and stuff because they do a lot of physical things. They maybe sing or breath work or stretching, and probably some of that creeped in there too. But kind of more of a physical endeavors type of category with martial arts. And then healing and wellness, of course, people using qigong all the way back to, of course, the Yellow Emperor's internal classic. It was called more Dao Yin in there, but Qigong used for a long time for the purposes of supporting wellness in people who are already well, or trying to help people heal who have a particular ailment or issue they're trying to work through. And then as spiritual cultivation, the overlaps of Qigong and influences from like internal alchemy type of systems, and everything even from early like shamanic practices that turn into things that kind of look like qigong, like dancing around like an animal, something, and then it becomes an animal qigong. Various types of ways people could use qigong and have for spiritual cultivation. But for us, we're mostly into the healing and wellness with this talk and this series. But just wanted to mention, kind of historically, the major reasons people might practice, why they would get into it, and how then that will influence the hows, of course, of how they'll practice and what they practice. So it's lagging again, but here we go. So next, then, what is Qigong from more of a kind of technical perspective, brass tack sort of perspective, rather than a textbook definition, and getting into how is it practiced, right? Because there's those familiar know like hundreds or thousands of styles and systems of qigong, ways to approach, pretty much as many as there are teachers of it almost. And so how do we even know what to include all in qigong practices? Right? You might just think, well, it's these kind of moving meditation practices that come out of China. That could work as a definition, but maybe as a little bit more of a technical kind of functional definition is looking at how whenever you do qigong, there's something that they're going to have you do with your body. And so you could be more static, just having a posture you're taking like we did. It might have some movements to it. It could be very complex, like a whole Tai Chi form or something, or just simple, like a simple standing qigong, maybe with a little arm moving. You're going to have something particular with your breathing. Of course, just inhale, exhale, but is it just through the nose and the mouth, one nostril, one then the next? Is it piston breathing? Is it pore breathing? Is it four wall breathing? Is it heel breathing? So all different types of things you can do with your breathing in the Qigong that you could be learning. And then, of course, whatever you're doing with like your consciousness, for lack of a better word, having a more active intent on what you're doing, or is the practice more one of a passiveness and awareness? And I've kind of structured this, you might already see, as sort of yin yang components of these, a more static yin posture, movement yang, inhale yin, exhale yang, awareness, the more passive, intent, the more active. So these kind of components of these three major variables of whatever you're doing. This is, right, you could, whatever practices you have for Qigong, you could get out your journal and you could write down what you actually did for these. It might be like some of those Tai Chi manuals where they're in excruciating detail writing out toe up, toe in, right hand down, left hand up, whatever. And you can have all the pictures in there too. because as someone looking at Qigong research, that's often one of the very lackluster areas of Qigong research is as a practitioner, as someone who could even prescribe practices, there's often very little descriptors of what the actual practices were in the research. So this could be used as like a format to try to create, to lay out what they actually did. In terms of Chinese kind of ideas, your body, of course, relates a lot to the Jing, your physicality, your essence. So they like to translate it. The breathing, of course, to your Qi, and the consciousness you could think of as like your Shen, or maybe your Xin, your heart, mind. And furthermore, you could think of how these different components have sort of their major practices. I might suggest historically, where historically, right, Qigong wasn't a term until the mid 20th century. Many of us know that. It was kind of coined by a soldier who, in his own process, found what he came to call Qigong useful. And he wrote about it, and it became very popularized as a term since then. But prior to that, as many of us know, there were earlier terms that were somewhat more specific in terms of like, what the exercise was. So you had Dao Yin exercises, which means leading and guiding. To me, implies a lot of the movements. And when you see a lot of it, it's like often people lying on the floor, rolling around. A lot of it looks like deep stretching. The idea you could stretch a part of your body, or you could put your mind somewhere, and then those could help to lead energy there, activate different channels through physical movements, leading with your mind. Tu nas, like a lot of the breathing exercises. If it means inhale, exhale exactly, Carson. If it means swallow and spit, or if that's a different term. To me, tu nas like an onomatopoeia, where it's like, right, if you exhale, hold your breath, and you inhale, it's like the exhale is like a and inhale. So it's like a tu na, it's like an onomatopoeia kind of. And then in terms of the consciousness, these were neigong, the inner skills of what you're doing. No one knows outside that you're leading light from your lower abdomen into your spine, but it's something you're doing inside. It's part of your intent, your awareness, that you're starting to feel a heat or a pressure build up, and you're looking inwardly. So neigong, neiguan, those could be terms that historically would be like descriptors of Qigong practice. And then also Yang Sheng, Yang Sheng Gong is often a term, on the titles of a lot of Qigong that are telling you it's like a Qigong practice that's going to nourish life or help with longevity type of thing. So that's just some of like, I keep going past the slide when I'm not really ready to. But those would all be, right, some major components of what your practice is, what it actually looks like, how you or what you're practicing. And then it's some of how you're practicing, you might think, right? Depending how you interpret the word how. But how to me also was looking at more of kind of the circumstantial, or we're closing in on 8 o'clock, the circumstantial or contextual factors of your practice, what we often term as lifestyle factors in Chinese medicine. And these to me would be many of the internal factors, things under your control. So one would be like, okay, you're practicing something, but you're doing it spontaneous now, just whenever you want. The movements change a little, right? You're just very spontaneous with what you're doing, or you're going to be more structured or systematized to tell you, how you like to practice. To me, a lot of this at the end of the day boils down to the part of the process of coming to know yourself through Qigong practice. Because depending on how you answer a lot of the variables of practice in terms of how you like to practice, when you like to practice, what you like to practice, it's going to tell you things that we could use to put you into one of our common systems of archetyping people. We would do like the 5-element archetype. And if you like more spontaneous practice, you're probably more of a fire and water person to me. And maybe earth, if that's just what other people do around you. You know, do what they do. If you like more structured and systematized, you're probably more of a wood or metal type of person in general, but everyone has some of each. So you can use, that's just one example of how you use your practice as a mirror, as a way to reflect on what you like and what seems to work for you. And that can give you clues about who you are. In Taoism and Chinese medicine, there's context for trying to figure out who we are elementally and work through that to bring ourselves to completion. So other factors influencing how you practice, lifestyle things, right? Your waking and sleeping routines, your sleep hygiene, you might say, people call it, right? What time you go to bed, you wake up, you waking up to practice in the middle of the night. Some people do that. You're waking up early to practice. How rested are you? So your food and drink habits are going to affect your practice, how satiated, how full you are, how hydrated you are. You know, there's a lot in terms of this. You know, we have the whole topic of bigu, abstaining from grains in Taoism and Qigong practice. So tailoring your diet, obviously don't have time to go into all this, but tailoring your diet to support your practice and hydrating yourself in a way that's supportive of practice. Many might know, right? I heard a joke when I was in school or something about, you know, Taoist coffee is just hot water. And sure enough, when I met some like the Wudang Taoist priests and stuff, and I just saw, oh, they're just drinking, they asked for hot water at the restaurant. Right? So you actually see that culturally in people. It's cool. But all the acupuncture students get into it drinking hot water and tying scarves around their kidneys and all that kind of stuff. So hydration, electrolyte balance, very important. If we're thinking of how conductive we can make our systems as one component of Qigong, an electrical component. And then also clothing, shoes. They didn't have to think about it in the past, but synthetic clothing versus natural fibers. And from a scientific perspective, I've wondered often about, in particular with silk, how all those natural fibers are piezoelectric, and that when they have mechanical stress, or you would think the thermal energy subtly applies mechanical stress to the fibers of the clothing, that as you heat up the clothes that you're wearing and you create this little atmosphere between your skin and the clothes, that then that could start to affect the clothes and maybe potentially, right? Like silk is very piezoelectric. If you mechanically stress it, it releases electricity, and how that could potentially influence or impact someone's practice, right? What's the difference if you do wear all silk when you practice and it's real silk and you have your cuffs are all, you know, cuffed off. So you're building like between your skin and your clothes, a field of energy, right? All the moisture and heat and maybe little thunderstorms you're creating in there. And shoes, of course, right? In the old days, they allowed for conductivity through the shoes, 1,000 layers of cotton soles or whatever they were, cloud walking shoes, that people used to have more connection to the earth, as people in modern times like to look at earthing and grounding. That type of idea could be significant for your Qigong practice, or otherwise throwing off your alignment, right? If you have big pumps or lifts or whatever it is. So we're going to eat a little bit into the question answer time. Hope that's okay. All right, thumbs up there. And then otherwise, how you're practicing, to me, would be lifestyle factors of your Qigong practice and its balance with other treatments you're going through. Or if you're endeavoring in some type of healthcare routine, like exercise-wise, maybe physical therapy, or you're seeing a chiropractor, or you know, you're doing self-care routines in terms of just, you know, exercise you like, you're also doing yoga classes or Pilates or whatever it is, CrossFit, and then the different activities and hobbies you do, and how these all have an impact energetically on your system, Like I often think about how with acupuncture, qigong, it's like for a very short amount of time, really, you're getting a very, you're putting a lot of intention and focus into the person's system or in your own system of how you want things to play out and how you want to make a shift. But that's just the drop in the bucket in terms of the whole week. If you leave the 1 hour qigong class that was for, healing whatever ailment maybe, but then you go back to your life that otherwise doesn't support that healing process, then how much can you expect the qigong to do or the acupuncture to do, etc. So you have to examine the person's whole life potentially if you're really wanting to make the most of it, maybe. So then there's variables of when to practice qigong, the times of day, the month, the year. These would fit into the stems and branches. We have the hour, the day, the month, the year, and those all have, just have one here, the circular version of, those all have different yin and yang and elemental correspondences. So if you're trying to heal whatever, the liver, and you want to do it on then times, days, months, years to correspond to that element, that organ, you could do that. People do that with acupuncture. They call it horary treatments, where they like to treat the point on the channel. So for liver, if you wanted to do a treatment that is the point of the channel, you have to do it during the hour of that on the organ clock. They call it horary treatment, which is between liver is 1 to 3 a.m. It's the idea that people might go in for a treatment to be in alignment with the time of a thing could make all the difference. And we don't know, right? Unless you test it. And so then there's 28 lunar mansions. That's these 4 7-day periods. Again, have elemental, yin and yang correspondences. The 24 seasonal periods of the solar calendar is these 24, roughly 15 long day segments, 15-day long segments. On Heyrman-Hart talk, the first time I heard about it, it's called these 72 Wuhuo material manifestations, these 72 5-day periods. So I'm a neophyte in that, but I figured further promote that this exists. And then, like I mentioned, the internal organ clock, that every 2 hours, a different organ is having an increased allotment of energy taking place within it and its channel. And then I call it your internal firing time, I'll call it firing time. And that's like the timing that comes from your own body. Like some systems will say, like, first build up energy and then in your belly. And then once you feel heat in your belly, then you're ready for the next move, the next part of the practice. And that would be like part of the internal firing time, one component of it, of listening to your own system for signs and signals that it's time to move on to the next part of the practice or the next practice. So all of these could be considered for, right? If you're trying to hyper focus your practice with intention, then taking the time of day, the time of year, and also to support that more. And then also, if in general you're just trying to maintain health and wellness, of course, many practices are based around changing your qigong practice along with the seasons. Is it Chen Duan, the 24 seasonal qigong or something? I haven't learned that one yet, but yeah. So when to practice, and then also where to practice. These two to me are kind of more like the external type of variables. When is it, and where are you going to be? So the impact of the environment on the practice and practitioner, and vice versa, right? Meaning like, how does where you practice affect what you're practicing and also you? And it might be more obvious, the distinction, when you think of how what you're doing is affecting the environment you're in, and how what you might be doing at qigong and it affects the environment one way, and maybe someone else does the same practice, but they're a different practitioner. And so they affect the environment differently because they're different. And they're also affected by the environment differently. And their practice then is affected differently. And what, if anything, from all of that is measurable? The impact of our environment on us or us on our environment. And so are we practicing indoor, outdoor? The Qigong, you want to be more contained, more protected in that way, have more control over your space. And of course, this brings in a lot of feng shui components of how are you going to set up your space. Maybe it's just to your personal aesthetics, or maybe you are bringing in a system like feng shui that again tries to tailor your environment to your intent. That if there's something you really want out of the practice, then feng shui is going to have all the ways that you can set up your room, your space, your house to try to help get towards that goal. And then if you're practicing outdoor, then are you going to be in the mountains or the islands? It's like the two classic images of Taoist immortals living in the mountains or the islands. But what, could be any landscape that speaks to you, right? The desert or the forests or the ocean or the swamps or tundra, maybe, whatever it is. And how, people do that for healing, go on retreat somewhere. And that's, I think, often you see a lot of drastic healing when people do relocate places to do some of the healing. And I think a big part of it is changing the context of their life for some time, that you have a different input now on your day-to-day level. Everything has changed really, except you. But then you start to change in a new environment a lot. So then your disease also changes, your illness process also changes. But how do you pick which landscape you'll go to? Where is the healing chi for you? And once you get there, then the general landscape of it, but then the specifics, the particulars, you stand on the sunny side of the hill or the shady side of the hill, up at the top or down in the valley, north side of the creek or south side of the creek. So these are a lot of the feng shui principles coming in. Of course, meaning wind and water, kind of the unmentioned component that's very much in there is the earth, right? And these three together, represented by in Taoism, they call the San Guan. It's the three officials of like the skies, the earth in between, and the water representing like the underworld. So these are all components that you consider in Qigong. How windy is it, right? Is it dry or muddy over here? Is it sandy or loamy? Is it, that's part of the moisture component. You have temperature, light, humidity, the ion balance in the air. You have the ground conductivity is going to relate to the ion balance, electrolytes in the ground, the ambient electromagnetic radiation frequencies, and the prevalent vegetation or whatever's nearby. A lot of Qigong based around working with plants and Qi exchange with plants, and interesting research. Maybe some have seen that study about the plants hooked up to electrodes, and in the other part of the building, they dumped a bunch of prawns into boiling water. And at that moment, all the plants started spiking electrically through the sensors on their leaves. So how sensitive plants can be to changes in their environment, and how we might be able to interact with them through Qigong type of practices. Also, part of where to practice would be like your direction, your orientation. So you're outside, you found your spot. Now, which way do you face? Very important idea for a lot of people traditionally. Which direction, having again different elemental associations and all of that. And even if you're inside, facing the different directions, where often there's within Taoism, you're going to different directions. The idea of gathering different energies from different directions, if not land features and such. So there's that component. And then structures that are around you, where of course temples and things were all laid out. I'd like to think rather mindfully about being supportive environments, but how people through history have constructed magnificent structures that could possibly be cultivational type of structures. You might think of as temples, or maybe we don't know why, but there's standing stones there. But maybe it was some part of a cultivational structure or just in general, the implications of feng shui and what I like have heard the term of like sonic geometry, the idea that everything around us has a geometry that is emitting in its own way a frequency that is going to affect us. And so how this could lead, I mean, people really studied this, right? What are the effects of different types of building structures on people and their Qigong practice and their health, and how that could lead, to people want to change really a lot of structures or public buildings, things like that. But in any case, considering the things around you, the structures around you, or how you could even build things to complement your practice. I'm reminded now of a place near Asheville where they had a copper pipe pyramid, right, out in the woods that people like to go and meditate in. So how does your practice change if you put yourself into some type of a structure, or you, like a lot of the Taoists, make a cave that you isolate yourself in, and you start to change the dynamics of the cave by being in there, and it changes you. So these to me are the areas where there's a lot of potential for instrumentation that you could use to monitor a lot of these variables in terms of like EMF sensors to detect changes in the ambient environment, ion detectors for the air. Many of us know the positive benefits of negatively charged ions, prevalent in forests, places with like humidity and trickling water, waterfalls, etc., the beachside, and how that correlates to more humidity in the air, and that's going to make more of a conductive medium in the local atmosphere. Very negative ion-rich environments. So you might also have moisture meters or ground conductivity meters. Take little electrodes, and they have these devices. You put them in the ground, and they measure the resistance and conductivity of the ground. And how might your practice change if you're in a spot that's very conductive in terms of the ground versus if it's a very insulated ground? Sometimes you want to connect to things outside yourself. Sometimes you want your practice is more about being contained within and maintaining, I say, like a degree of pressure internally and not letting anything kind of go in or go out. So sometimes you want to be more insulated in your practice, going up maybe to a very high climate where it's very dry type of and cold type of climate. You don't want to have anything leaking out at that point. You could also be having an anemometer that's a wind speed measure type of thing. One of my weird things that I think happens to me is sometimes practicing, it seems like the wind kicks up. I didn't ask for that, but it's just, I mean, you might just say it's coincidence, but after enough times, it just, when it starts to feel weird to you, where especially days where it's very still and a little time goes by, usually more when you forget that ever happens, and then it starts to happen. And so that's a question mark for me that's come up from my practice. Is there some consistency with this happening? What would it look like, through some of these devices, trying to measure changes as I was doing practice? Ozone sensors, thermal cameras, right? Can you actually see through a thermal camera your belly getting hot or your hands getting hot or some sort of ball of energy, right, thermally between your hands, or UV, ultraviolet camera? Plant meters, if you're practicing with a plant, hooking up to see can you produce changes in the plant. When I just typed in earlier to see what a plant meter is called, I saw a product called Plant Wave, where now you can hook up, they sell it's a little device, you put electrodes on the leaves of a plant, and it interprets the electrical conductive changes, and then they have a program in it that like changes that into a tone. And so the way they market it is you can like hear musically changes taking place within the plant electrochemically. So it could be an interesting product to practice with, do Qigong, doing with the plant. So with all these meters and types of things, I see the potential for many opportunities for interdisciplinary collaboration from a kind of Eastern side of actual Qigong practitioners, people doing this, and Feng Shui practitioners who could try to help put the practice in alignment with some of these variables to try to test for some of the variables. Because not all Qigong people have the background to do like Feng Shui interpretations of trying to find like the right spot to do the Qigong for what you want to happen. So like that could be two people or someone. You could have earth scientists in terms of geologists, soil scientists, hydrologists, meteorologists, botanists, and of course you as a cultivator, or if you're a scientist or whatever, people who could be coming together interdisciplinary to study Qigong, its effects on people and on the world around them. And so furthermore, measuring the effects of these variables, it's lagging again. There it is. Internally, we have these typical possible sort of qi experiences or relatively common things people might feel in terms of heat in their body while they're practicing different regions of their body, feel tingling, feel some kind of pressure, might be localized or overall your whole body, like a lightness or heaviness. Could hear sounds within your system, thunders, crackling, things. You could see light, right? You could be in a completely dark room and it's like as bright as the sun is on. It's an interesting experience. So you're sensitizing internally, and that's just you. You could journal that or sit and forget it or whatever, but things you could be experiencing. And then measurement tools from kind of a Chinese perspective off the top of my head. Of course, Chinese pulse taking, where we think we can measure the qi of all the different organs and meridians. So that could be a before and after type of thing for people doing research. And you have a pulse taker who could do the pulses on a person before and after and see what type of changes in that regard take place. Just like we do often pulses before, sometimes also during, but then after an acupuncture treatment to see real time, what can we get to change? Also other traditional sort of dowsing devices. It could be a person's hand, feeling for warmth on someone or yourself, but also people might use like pendulums and crystals, or all those types of things, or sticks or leaves or metal rods or whatever, to try to find concentrations of energy places and see maybe how things are moving places. Otherwise, Western medical type of measuring, of course, take the pulse, the blood pressure, the pulse, the blood oxygen saturation, blood tests, the labs to look at what are the changes taking place before and after practices. All the different type of neurological monitoring you could do on someone. They have, you see in acupuncture newspapers, the skin kind of conductivity meters with these little devices, and you can hold and try to find the points, based on where the device is touching and where it says there's more conductivity taking place typically. But otherwise, that's palpation. We feel for a point. X-ray, MRI, all these different types of imaging, thermal imaging, UV cameras that you could set on someone practicing, or yourself if you've got the budget for it, and see what happens, right? So those, measuring the effects, and these would go into your journal, these would go into your lab report, of course. And so now this idea I mentioned of grouping by internal and external, we're approaching the end here. As I mentioned, it's just kind of a rough framework. I sort of occurred to me thinking about this talk and all these variables where internal and external is a common sort of grouping throughout a lot of Chinese systems, whether it's internal, external martial arts or internal, external chapters of Taoist classics, or like in Chinese medicine, a lot of internal, external idea like systems like causes of disease grouped as internal and external, etc. layers of energy being more internal or external. So I figured we could group some of these practice variables by relatively more internal type of variables, things that to me are more under our control or like are innate to us, like why we're practicing. The variables, of course, of our constitution are foundational. So then everything we do, the what and hows we talked about of how we're practicing, all the context of lifestyle, other exercise, diet, all things under our control that can affect our practice. And you might say then, well, we can decide when we're practicing and to some extent where we're practicing as well. But then those also have kind of the external. So that's all I really came up with for that idea. But yeah, when and where we're practicing. Just a general another framework you could think of these variables through. You can elaborate on this, people watching, if you have other things to add. So where does that leave us or you after watching that? Or if you're interested in researching Qigong scientifically or you're practicing for your own reasons, then my hope is that this, gave you some things to potentially consider for variables you can work with in your endeavors of researching or self-cultivation, practicing. And that through having these variables to consider, that you always find new ways to approach healing, because that's one of the blessings of this, is that if it's not working, what you're doing you feel isn't working, you'll start changing some of these variables. And maybe there's some you haven't thought of before. And obviously we didn't elaborate really on any of these. Some of these I've elaborated on my YouTube channel. Things like, some of the typical diet things along with Qigong practice, or when to practice. I've elaborated on some of these prior. But my hope is that this gives people who are approaching it for their own practice or for research a kind of big picture view of things they might consider as being part of the practice or research they're doing. And to always, because one of the pitfalls for some temperaments is going to be that then, considering all this now, they might always be worried that they're not doing it right, or they're not doing enough or whatever. And doing it right, it's going to be more metal person, whatever. But to me, like I said, I hope it just gives people more feelings of possibilities and things to change, to give more opportunities of how to change their approach to healing. It's giving more possibilities for healing. And to not get too caught up on the minutia and the details, because eventually what I would think you want to have take place, and what a lot of the lore talks about, is people, you develop through your practice to a point that the variables don't matter as much, because what is crucial is what you're bringing to it as your cultivation. So eventually, if not more immediately, based on your temperament, you could start to supersede a lot of the variables, and you bring to the cultivation, what you bring is really the primary point, and everything else can change based on that. So going through all these changes, like I said, is a process of self-discovery, reflecting on what you like in terms of practicing, how you practice, and reflecting on that. And then the final thing was back to the beginning, where I pulled out the question from that mission statement of, to make sure I touch on what is the role of vital energy in health and healing. And based on this and sort of the definition of qi, vital energy, that I gave as especially being like the relationship that exists between things, is to me then a big part of the role of qi in health and healing, is that it is this in-between force that can, because like others have mentioned in this series, qi to the Chinese mindset, traditional thinking, is everything has qi. You're not going to pin it down in any one thing or any one force, right? In terms of like maybe you think some like like the unified field theory type of force. You think dark energy is going to be chi. No, they're all going to have their own kind of chi in a way. And so everything having its own chi, it all provides us different opportunities of ways to relate to the world and relate to our health and ourselves, and to provide us different opportunities for healing. So I think the role of energy, vital energy, is like that it continues from this perspective to allow us to connect to relate to things, and to transform through the experiences of life, to try to affect some health and healing. And to me, it's like health and healing also is a big question. Of course, why do we heal in the first place? And it's a big question. And just quickly say my short answer is I think it's because we have places to go. Right? We relate healing in general with the wood element, relates to the childhood time of life, and right, it's a time we still have some place to grow, to go to grow, life to grow through. And healing is like the wood element, is perennial in its possibilities. The spring keeps coming back. Some people heal for a long time through different things, and some people don't. And why? Well, to me, is because then they don't have anywhere here still to go. And so he, energy, chi, helps us to relate to the things. It's how we relate to things while we're here. And then it is also with us when we go, I think leave here also, that when we no longer need health or healing, we can leave this life behind. We don't have anything left to do, that could still be healing, because we're going on potentially to the next thing that's going to continue to be healing to us. So I don't think that was a clear answer at all, but I'm very conscious that I'm over time. So thank you. If there's any questions, and that's my website and YouTube if you're interested in more ramblings.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for this. I think you touched on a lot of things that we can consider, like you said, both if we're interested in studying Qigong, or in our own practice if we happen to be practitioners. Let's open up to the floor a little bit in
Yeah,
case there's anyone who wants to ask questions. Please feel free to, you
no
can use
rush.
the raise hands function, or physically raise your hand, or uh, whatever works. I'll see if we can get enough screens here. And either I can call on people, or Greg, you can call on people directly if you see anyone.
Okay. I don't have the whole view. I have a
I
few.
think you have to close the
There
stop
we
share.
go. Okay. Oh, there it is. Stop share. Okay. All right. Gallery view. That gives me more people. So did anyone have anything to write in, or any questions? You can unmute yourself. Make sure I'm in the chat.
Yeah, well, if there are no other questions immediately, maybe I'll give people some time to think, and we'll go over just a little bit, but not too long. But I wanted to comment, I think, oh, there is a question coming in. Let's go to that.
Yeah. So here, so I know Nancy. Hi, Nancy. So yeah, so to build more energy, to me, the starting place for that, like if you want to gather something, is you need the space to hold it. You need a container, an empty vessel. So to me, a lot of the beginning practices are those of like emptying out. So then you can fill up, creating space. Like I got people, to breathe into the Dantian in a way just to create space. And by beginning that process of creating void, then from Taoist point of view, that's going to be the source of everything, of course. But the empty space allows being, and yin, being still, is going to be like attracting, and being yin attracts yang. So you want qi, which is relatively a yang substance, at least in the Chinese medicine context, that you be yin, you just create some space and you sit still, and then that funnels into you like a black hole, right? Just all the energy going into it. So that's like a beginning way, at least, is like to build more chi, first creating the space, the emptiness, and then working with the idea of course, where the mind goes, the chi goes. So if you can't be empty, can you put your mind there and try to have a consolidation of that, have some energy gathering in to the emptiness, and then the breathing techniques. How does the Jin Jing principles work in this? So in terms of Jin Jing, like sinew channels. So how does the sinew channels principles work in this? I see her nodding yes. I mean, for one, first, like a state of relaxation through the sinew channels to have she's shaking her head no. So I'm not sure if I'm getting the question. Because to me, you need to be relaxed to gather, to hold. So to get into a state of meditation, emptiness, so relaxing. And so if there's tension places, then that's of course going to be already a stagnation of energy typically. So first relaxing out the sinews and not having any stagnation or impediment to circulation or gathering. So that would be a first component. I'm not sure if there's something more particular about the sinew channels you want about that. No. Okay, I see like no now. All right. I could think of more things, I'm sure. Give me a minute. Not sinew channels. Anything else?
Well, I suppose if there are no other questions, I kind of have a bit of a comment that I just want to say how really important it is to look at. One of the things that you highlight in your talk is how important all these different factors are in understanding what's going on in a Qigong practice or a related type of practice. It's not just that sometimes in research, there's an idea you take somebody and put them in an MRI machine in a sterile lab, and then you're going to get the same results that you would if they're practicing, in the mountain on the right kind of day at the right kind of time and doing their own thing. And so being able to bring up all those different factors and become aware of them and think about how to control them is really, really significant. And not just from the scientific perspective, but I also think so looking at some of the older Taoist meditation manuals or the texts about them for like Neidan texts or other material, one way of looking at them is to think of them not so much as prescriptive, this is what you're going to do in the practice, but that they're confirmatory, right? So when this is happening, then this sort of result could come about, right? That they describe the things like warmth or certain kinds of experiences. The light experience is a very common one, the one that you brought up with the light in the dark room. Um, and so in that sense, maybe those Taoists back in the past are kind of almost doing a proto-science of trying to test things out in the laboratory of their own experience and testing these different environments, controlling them. Some texts talk about Kenyans, it talks about adjusting the light in your room and adjusting the temperature and getting the wind in and all these things. And so they were doing a bit of this all the way back then too. And
Cool.
so it's really great that you're bringing that up. I think that's important.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, and like what you touched on there as far as the controls, because that's a major thing within scientific research is always trying to control for your variables, but especially the timing ones from this traditional perspective would be, to me, difficult to control when you have the seasons constantly changing and day by day is a different stem and branch. Well, maybe it was that was a double fire day that you finally felt that amount of heat taking place, or whatever it is, these subtle ideas that traditionally would influence people in how, why, when, where, what they practice. And in a laboratory setting, that changes day by day. And the control is something with time. You can't hold on to that. So, yeah, ever changing world. So here's another write in. Thank you for an elegantly clear and thank you and comprehensive overview of the field of Qigong. Appreciate that. I did my best. As a psychologist, I taught Qigong to a combat veteran and even clunky pre PST subjective measures showed change. I love to hear that. That's awesome. Thank you. I hope it was clear enough. That's great. Yeah, there's so much that could be done for sort of minority communities and those who don't have best access to healthcare. That even with simple practices, some simple practices that could help with a lot of common health ailments, both physical, psychological. So there's so much for, I think, a public health sector benefits that could come from Qigong. Like, I think one of the positive aspects of Chinese government is often they do promote Qigong as useful to mass public health type of applications, promoting people to get out and to practice in parks and all of that. And we should bring more to our underserved communities here. Any other questions or thoughts from anyone? No rush. I'm looking through here. I see some familiar names. It's nice to see you all here. Really, if anyone, any questions? If there's anything else I forgot to say, probably.
There's always things we forget, right?
Yeah.
Well, if not, I recognize talking about seasonal changes. It's started getting dark much earlier here. Almost, it feels like at 4 o'clock. So I imagine many of us are getting a little tired. But thank you again, Greg. Thank you, Dr. Casey, for this wonderful presentation. And thank you, everyone, for coming here and joining us today. And hope you all have a wonderful.
Larson, can I just add one thing, please?
Please.
Dr. Casey has very graciously agreed to allow us to post his lecture on our website. So it will be available probably in about a week or so. If you can't find it, just contact me.
And if you're interested in more of the talks that he gives, please do check out his website and his YouTube channel, where Dr. Casey gives regular talks and conversations on that. So
My regular. It's been a few months, honestly.
that's regular enough.
I'll get back to it eventually.
Well, all right. Well, thank you, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you again.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.